What could Charlie Kirk's career have become had he left the pro-Israel cause? It was about time, given that the tide appears to be turning among younger Republicans, his base of support. Kirk was put into a difficult position, however, with regard to how much leeway he had to criticize Israel. In a conversation with Megyn Kelly, the two described how sensitive their pro-Israel friends were to mild and hardly controversial criticism of Israel's policies. In this exchange, the two merely suggest that Israel stop its campaign in Gaza, but only because they think it's best for Israel.
I have text messages, Megyn, calling me an anti-Semite. I am learning biblical Hebrew and writing a book on the Shabbat. I honor the Shabbat, literally the Jewish Sabbath. I host a person that I moderate the debate of, mind you, right? And I give equal time to Josh Hammer, equal time to a pro-Israel advocate, and my moral character is being put into question. Having Dave Smith or Tucker at my event, it is all of a sudden, oh, Charlie is he's no longer with us and all that. I said, wait a second, what do you mean? What does with us mean exactly, right? I'm an American, okay?
As we can see, Kirk is very pro-Israel here still. But Tucker-Carlson claims that Kirk's worldview was evolving.
He believed that the war on terror had been a net loss for the United States and it caused incalculable damage, not just economic and physical damage, but spiritual damage to the United States. It was bad. We got nothing out of it. We were only hurt. And he didn't want to see that again. And he felt very strongly about that. And of course, I agreed. And so before that speech that I gave in July, we had a conversation about this backstage right before I went on. And I was fulminating and getting all red in the face like I often do to my shame. And I was mad thinking about this and thinking about the effort by the neocons in the United States to draw us in to another forever war with Iran. And I said, probably not going to talk about that. I'm not going to torture you. I know your donors hate this when I say that. And he looked at me, I'll never forget it, and said, go all the way. Do it. Go all the way. I said, man, a lot of things I can talk about. I don't need to talk about that. And he said, do it. So I did it.
Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Reading the talking point that apparently everyone, a bumper sticker that is for sale somewhere, I guess. And I'm like, okay, I don't even know what that means exactly, but how many Americans have been killed by Shia terrorism in my lifetime, which is 56 years? And then there's the drug epidemic, which has killed more than 1 million people during that same period. People I know. So you're telling me Iran is a bigger threat than the people peddling this garbage? I don't think so. Not where I live, it's not.
The ones who were offended by my speech, and there was a small, very intense group who were, tormented Charlie Kirk until the day he died. 2 days before he died, he lost a $2 million donation because he had publicly pledged to bring me to the next Turning Point conference in December.
Indeed, this appears to be confirmed by texts released by Candace Owens, which were verified as accurate by Turning Point USA spokesman Andrew Colvett.
That was a screen grab that I had shared with people. So it is authentic.
Kirk reveals in the text, as told by Tucker-Carlson, that he had lost donors because he wouldn't boot Carlson from his planned America Fest event. The texts say he may have to leave the pro-Israel cause. You have to imagine what this would have done for the American right had he become more critical of Israel. We'll never know, will we? It would have been a no-brainer for Kirk to at least continue to open a venue for the generational debate on the U.S.-Israel relationship. The younger generation of Republicans are increasingly skeptical of Israel's impact on U.S. alliances and the role of the pro-Israel lobby on American foreign policy. Many young Americans are starting to realize that they have been lied to about the supposed benefits of this relationship. I'd argue that there's another lie that has been repeatedly drilled into the minds of generations of Americans. I think it potentially stops many Republicans, especially older Republicans, from letting go of their romantic attachment to Israel. Hey everybody, due to the content of my videos, I'm not advertiser friendly, so if you want to support my work, consider becoming a patron for access to exclusive content and the GDF Discord server. I also accept donations. Thank you so much to everyone who has become a patron and donated. Love you all, thank you. And that's the idea that Israelis are the safekeepers of Christians and Christian holy sites in Palestine. First, It's not as though Christians were spared the expulsion orders and massacres of the Nakba. To take one example, in October 1948, 12 Christians were summarily executed in the village of Ailabun.
واحنا قاعدين بده ينادوا على الشباب انت تعال انت تعال انت تعال حياة اخوي كان قاعد هيك بجنبي كان لابس ربطة منقطة آخر مرة شفنا خلاص مفيش هيك
with the remaining residents expelled to Lebanon.
I want civilization to win. I want the West to win. I don't want the Islamo-fascist barbarians to storm the gates of Jerusalem. I want the holy sites protected.
Charlie Kirk's characterization, perhaps an ultimately unsuccessful bid to assuage his donors, belies basic facts about the history of Palestine. Muslim rule over Palestine, comprising some 12 centuries, was hardly barbarous. As observed by Nur Masalha in his mammoth Palestine, a 4,000-year history, the local Arab-Muslim-Christian bonds in Jerusalem can be traced to early Islam. Under Muslim rule, the city of Jerusalem was granted special status. Aliyah Capitolina remained the official name of Jerusalem until 638 AD, when the Arabs conquered the city and kept the first part of it as Eliyah. Eliyah, later Beit al-Maqdis and al-Quds, was the sacred religious capital of the Umayyad state and of Palestine. Following the Muslim conquest in the 7th century, the Arab rulers endorsed the principle of autocephaly and recognized the autonomy of the Church of Aliyah Capitolina as the seat of Palestinian Orthodox Christianity. And throughout early Islam, the city of Caesarea continued to thrive as a largely Christian city. Local autonomy of the archbishops of Caesarea and of Aliyah Capitolina increased significantly under Arab Muslim rule, and the See of Caesarea Maritima became the effective local rulers not only of the city, but also of its surrounding countryside. I won't lie and say it was always tranquil between Christians and Muslims, as you all know full well. There were the Crusades, after all. The Shia Ismaili Fatimid Khalif al-Hakim had the Church of the Holy Sepulchre destroyed in 1099. Masalha writes, the Egypt-based Shia Fatimid state invaded Palestine in 970, which was under the control of the Abbasid Caliphate, conquering the whole of the country in 972. The late Father Jerome Murphy O'Connor of Jerusalem's École Biblique wrote of the city, recognized as a holy city sacred to the two religions of the book, Judaism and Christianity, regarded as the predecessors of Islam, Jerusalem became a center of Muslim pilgrimage. It was protected and embellished by successive dynasties, Umayyad, Abbasid, and Fatimid, until 1009, when the Mad Khalif Hakim unleashed a savage persecution of Christians and many churches were destroyed. Masalha describes the dire consequences of al-Hakim's brutality. Fatimid policies adversely affected the province of Palestine, and these policies became an impetus not only to local rebellions, but also to the invasion of Palestine by the Seljuks in 1073 and the Latin Crusaders in 1099. Hakim's son al-Zahir allowed the Byzantines to rebuild the church. Nonetheless, the church served as the ultimate inspiration for the Crusades. And as a result of their campaign into Palestine, wrote Murphy O'Connor, the Crusaders occupied the Holy City on July 15, 1099. Their first act was to massacre all the Muslim inhabitants.
After every engagement on the First Crusade, the Crusaders would return to the camp with the heads of the Muslims slain on spears.
When Salah ad-Din wrested control of Palestine from the Crusaders, Masalha writes, symbolically, the keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest site in Christianity, were entrusted to two aristocratic Palestinian Muslim families in the city. Created by Salah ad-Din shortly before his death in 1193, this post-Crusader ceremonial tradition added another widely respected layer of daily rituals to the multi-layered ancient sacredness of the site. The tradition still continues to this day, more than 800 years later.
My name is Adib Jude al-Husseini. I am the keyholder of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. My job is not just an honorable job, and it is not just the heritage of my family as a Muslim family. It is the heritage to all Muslims across the world that a Muslim family has held and preserved the church for 850 years.
Indeed, as Masalha plainly states, Muslims coexisted with Christian Arabs and Arab Jews in Muslim-majority Palestine for centuries, including up to the period of the British conquest of Palestine. Wasif Jawarieh was a prolific diarist who chronicled his life in Jerusalem over 6 decades, beginning in 1904. Jawarieh wrote how Jerusalem became a fractured society as a result of British rule during the Mandate period. He was himself an Eastern Orthodox Christian. In an especially enlightening passage, we Jerusalemites of the various denominations had always lived like a family during Ottoman rule, and there was never any difference between a Muslim and a Christian. But when Britain occupied Jerusalem, it tried to sow trouble, particularly among Muslims and Christians. As though it had not been vicious enough in issuing the sinister Balfour Declaration after the occupation, causing the loss of our homeland, it banned Muslims from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and Christians from the Temple Mount. But more than a century of British and Zionist occupation have not broken the spirit of Palestinian solidarity across religious lines. The city of Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus Christ, has foregone Christmas celebrations for the last 2 years out of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza, with religious leaders and the mayor of the city employing sharply critical language in protest against the Israeli military occupation.
In light of the ongoing brutal aggression against our people and land, the municipality of Bethlehem has decided to limit its this year Christmas celebration to prayers and religious ceremonies. This is a statement of our rejection to the injustice inflicted on our people in Gaza and all of Palestine, and the massacres they endure.
We have never experienced challenges like this year. Bethlehem has become a big prison.
My name is Munder Ishaq. I'm the pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem. I feel bad even complaining, given that there is a genocidal war in Gaza, but the situation in Bethlehem is maybe the worst I've witnessed in my life.
440 days of constant bombing, non-stop. 440 days of starvation.
At the Evangelical Lutheran Church, they've fashioned a nativity scene out of what's now found everywhere in Gaza: rubble.
If you come to Bethlehem, and not only Bethlehem, every city in the West Bank right now is besieged with blocks, roadblocks that the Israeli soldiers control that we cannot move in and out.
Indeed, Palestinian Christians who live in Palestine currently live under military occupation. They don't need saving from barbarians at the gates. They need saving right now, today. During the Second Intifada, the town of Bethlehem was repeatedly invaded, and the Church of the Nativity, the birthplace of Jesus Christ, was itself a target of the Israeli military.
The Israeli army invaded Bethlehem with tanks. The Church of the Nativity was surrounded by Israeli soldiers.
Such is the nature of Christian solidarity with their Muslim countrymen, that Christian worshippers and preachers sheltered among dozens of Muslim fighters during the Second Intifada, when the Israeli military besieged the city. The Israeli Defense Forces laid siege to the church for 39 days, firing on the church and sniping those sheltering inside, killing 8 people. One of the dead was the church's bell ringer. The Church of the Nativity is the oldest church in continuous use in the world. At one point, a fire broke out on the church's grounds, reportedly caused by Israeli flares. Wrote Matt Reese for Time magazine, "The only toilets were on the second floor of the compound. They were soon foul because they couldn't be flushed once the Israelis cut off the water." Let's remember that the church's Franciscan friars were among those sheltering inside. Another person sheltering inside was Khalid Salah. To get to the bathroom, we had to run through an open space within sight of the snipers, Salah said. Sometimes they shot at us, so we only went once a day. The only water was in 3 old wells in the compound. It was impure, and many in the church developed diarrhea. Dashing out to the wells was dangerous. 6 Palestinians were hit by Israeli snipers as they tried to draw water. No one showered or shaved.
Father Amjad Sabara was a Franciscan friar and pastor of the Church of the Nativity. He lived in the compound and, like many of the other priests from different Christian orders, whose home it also was, made a decision to stay with the gunmen and civilians. Among those inside is American press photographer Carolyn Cole.
There was very, very little food by the time I got in there. I do remember that there were men that were sick from eating what had been available. The water supply had been cut off.
Just after the siege ended, New York Times reporters quoted a Franciscan priest who spent the entire 39 days in the church and declined to be identified by name, who said, "We could have left but chose to remain." They also noted that the entire town, not just those inside the church, were under nearly constant curfew. The Israeli army had invaded the city just the year before. During the course of that operation, a 16-year-old altar boy had been killed by Israeli snipers outside the church, one of dozens killed in and around the city. The church itself had reportedly been fired upon. Parishioners and priests in the Church of the Nativity said Israeli bullets fired this afternoon had knocked splinters from the wooden roof and chipped the stone floor, which was laid in the 12th century by crusaders, per the New York Times in October 2001. Bethlehem is, as are all Palestinian towns in the West Bank, subjected to raids, invasions, and of course, military occupation is the day-to-day norm. To understand how Israeli soldiers could act so callously with such an important religious site to Christians, it is worth mentioning that there is a documented institutional lack of respect for Christianity in the Israeli army. As early as 1979, then Israel's Sephardi chief rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who was also spiritual mentor of the Orthodox religious party of Shas, which was in the government of Ehud Barak, ruled that the New Testament should be burned because Christianity is a form of idolatry.
Prime Minister Netanyahu paid tribute to him, saying he worked greatly to enhance Jewish heritage, his coffin carried by Israel's political elite.
The practical effect of this ruling was revealed in the Hebrew daily Ma'ariv in June 1985, when New Testament copies found in the library of the base of the Army Chief Education Officer were burned by the military rabbi of the base. 3 weeks later, Ma'ariv reported that the influential Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee had referred to the incident, and one of its members, MK and Rabbi Chaim Druckmann, had justified the New Testament burning. Other rabbis with supremacist views have held prominent positions in Israel's elite military academies. As explained by The Economist, B'nai David was Israel's first pre-military academy. It was established in the settlement of Eli in 1988 and offers both religious and military training. Since then, thousands of its students have joined Israel's armed forces. Israeli-Canadian journalist David Sheen, a Hebrew speaker, has reviewed controversial quotes from several educators at the school.
B'nai David, this is the religious seminary considered to be the most important in terms of this is an army academy in which army officers are sent to study the Torah and the Talmud. So in the settlement of Eli, at this academy, you have rabbis teaching these lectures, and I'm just going to give you some quotes. Rabbi Eliezer Kashtiel, the non-Jews will want to be our slaves, he says.
בעזרת השם זה יחזור. הם ירצו הגויים להיות עבדים שלנו.
זהו הרב אליעזר קשתיאל, ראש ישיבת בני דוד בעלי.
הכי טוב להיות עבד של יהודים. הם שמחים להיות עבדים, רוצים להיות עבדים.
הישיבה הזו מיועדת לבוגרי המכינה הקדם צבאית, המוכרת והיוקרתית בציונות הדתית.
Being the slave of a Jew is the best. They must be slaves. They want to be slaves. Ask any simple Arab where he wants to be. He wants to be under the occupation. Why? Because they have a genetic problem. That's really something. This is the premier, military academy
The Economist continues, its graduates have been military advisors to Benjamin Netanyahu, the new general of Central Command, lived as a child on a settlement, and studied at the Eli Academy. Indeed, Brigadier General Avi Bluth oversees the military occupation of the West Bank. Alumni additionally include, Le Monde report, the heads of the Givati and Ephraim Northern Brigades, as well as 3 advisors to the minister responsible for the Occupied Territories Administration, Bezalel Smotrich, who is close to Rabbi Sadan, the Academy's founder. The Academy has been training the religious elite of the Israeli forces since 1988. Every year, 100 young people graduate, all from religious Zionist backgrounds. Half of them subsequently join the officer corps. The state pays for some 40% of its budget. In 2016, Rabbi Sadan was awarded the Israel Prize, the country's highest honor. Not unlike the destruction of Christian churches under the Fatimid Khalif al-Hakim more than 1,000 years ago, Israeli forces lay waste to religious institutions currently. Though over 1,000 mosques have been destroyed during the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza since October 2023, the Israeli military has also displayed their disregard for Christian institutions as well.
The Arab Orthodox Cultural and Social Center, this was the pride of the Christian community there, was hit by an Israeli airstrike and is no more. Nothing left from that building. The Greek Orthodox Church, the Assembly Hall, was destroyed and 18 people, mainly women and children, were killed.
Less than 2 weeks after October 7th, the Israeli Air Force struck a building of the Greek Orthodox Church of St. Porphyrios, the oldest active church in Gaza dating back to the 12th century. The church was sheltering hundreds of displaced Palestinians, and 18 were killed. The only Catholic church in Gaza was hit by an Israeli tank in July 2025.
This Byzantine church, with its ancient mosaics dating back to the 5th century, was destroyed in October.
Is it a war crime to deliberately target sites of cultural heritage?
Yes, it's a war crime under the 1954 Convention, under the additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions, and under the Rome Statute and elsewhere. So, yes, it is a war crime.
In September, archaeologists frantically moved artifacts from a warehouse set to be destroyed by the Israeli military. From the Associated Press, the warehouse contained artifacts from over 25 years of excavations, including items from a 4th century Byzantine monastery designated as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO, and some of the oldest known evidence of Christianity in Gaza. The Israeli military said the building housed Hamas intelligence installations and planned to demolish it as part of their expanded military operation in Gaza. They managed to move some 70%, but 30% of these priceless artifacts were destroyed. With the exception of a destruction of churches in 1009, Muslim rule has included the special status and protection of Jerusalem under the Rashidun, Umayyad, and Abbasid caliphates. The special protection bestowed on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre by Salah ad-Din will remember that Jesus Christ, or Isa alayhi salam, is revered by Muslims as one of their mightiest prophets. And nearly 4 centuries of Ottoman rule that saw coexistence between Christians, Muslims, and Jews. The Zionist occupation of Christian holy sites, however, has seen them come under direct attack by the Israeli military, which is still continuing. In the month that Charlie Kirk was killed, he claimed that Islam is the sword that the left uses to slit the throat of America. I'd argue it's America's war against Islam that has eroded America's standing in the world, undermined its alliances, led to economic decline, and further made the world a less stable and verifiably more dangerous place. As Alfred W. McCoy presciently warned in 2017, for the majority of Americans, the 2020s will likely be remembered as a demoralizing decade of rising prices, stagnant wages, and fading international competitiveness, driven in part by years of swelling deficits fed by incessant warfare in distant lands. Further, in the wake of the Iraq War and the Abu Ghraib torture scandal, Washington, like London in its day, found its control over key subordinate allies becoming ever more tenuous. What did America get out of this invasion? After Washington spent 8 years pacifying Iraq at a cost of 4,800 lives and $1 trillion, its ally in Baghdad, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, suddenly asserted his nation's sovereignty in 2011, forcing Washington to withdraw all its troops and curtail plans for making its 104-acre Baghdad embassy a bastion for American power in the Middle East. That rebuke was but one among many signs of fading influence worldwide. Was Iraq a war against Islam? That's how it was sold to Dick Cheney. At Camp David, just days after September 11th, Cheney was asked by Tim Russert whether there were plans to attack Iraq in response. Cheney responded with a resounding no.
The focus is over here on al-Qaeda and the most recent events in New York. Saddam Hussein's bottled up at this point.
Indeed, as recalled by Condoleezza Rice, Cheney was resolute at Camp David in his belief that Iraq would be a distraction in the aftermath of the attacks. Upon his death in 2018, Benjamin Netanyahu said of historian Bernard Lewis that he was one of the great scholars of Islam and the Middle East in our time. We will be forever grateful for his robust defense of Israel. Indeed, he was a confidant of successive Israeli prime ministers, including Ariel Sharon, reported the Wall Street Journal in a 2004 article about how the Lewis Doctrine, in effect, had become U.S. policy. In a private dinner with Dick Cheney at the vice president's residence, Mr. Lewis explained why he was cautiously optimistic the U.S. could gradually build democracy in Iraq, say others who attended. Mr. Lewis also held forth on the dangers of appearing weak in the Muslim world, a lesson Mr. Cheney apparently took to heart. Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press just before the invasion of Iraq, Mr. Cheney said, "I firmly believe, along with men like Bernard Lewis, who was one of the great students of that part of the world, that a strong, firm U.S. response to terror and to threats to the United States would go a long way, frankly, toward calming things in that part of the world." Michael Hirsch wrote for the Washington Monthly that same year, Lewis's basic premise, put forward in a series of articles, talks, and best-selling books, is that the West, what used to be known as Christendom, is now in the last stages of a centuries-old struggle for dominance and prestige with Islamic civilization. Lewis coined the term clash of civilizations, using it in a 1990 essay titled The Roots of Muslim Rage, and Samuel Huntington admits he picked it up from him. The only real answer to 9/11 was a decisive show of American strength in the Arab world, and the most obvious place to seize the offensive and end the age-old struggle was in the heart of the Arab world, in Iraq. In the Bush administration, Bernard Lewis was persona grata, delivering spine-stiffening lectures to Cheney over dinner in undisclosed locations. An official who sat in on some of the Lewis-Cheney discussions recalled, his view was, "Get on with it, don't dither." As revealingly described by prominent neoconservative Richard Pearl, who led Bush's Defense Policy Board, Bernard Lewis has been the single most important intellectual influence countering the conventional wisdom on managing the conflict between radical Islam and the West, says Mr. Pearl, who remains a close advisor to Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Today, we can see how war hawks in the Republican Party, as well as liberal hawks, continue the tradition of being pro-Israel and pro-interventionism, advancing a clash of civilizations theory that pits the West against Islam. In my opinion, if there's one sword that slits the throat of America, it's this one. It has also been enormously destructive to millions of people. Michael Hirsch explains how Lewis's clash of civilizations argument has been used to delegitimize recent and reasonable grievances of Muslims by appealing to fantasies of ancient conflicts. At least until the Iraq War, most present-day Arabs didn't think in the stark clash of civilizations terms Lewis prefers. To most Arabs before 9/11, the Crusades were history as ancient as they are to us in the West. Modern Arab anger and frustration is, in fact, less than 100 years old. As bin Laden knows very well, this anger is a function not of Islam's humiliation at the Treaty of Karlovitz of 1699, the sort of long-ago defeat that Lewis highlights in his best-selling What Went Wrong, but of much more recent developments. These include the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement, by which the British and French agreed to divvy up the Arabic-speaking countries after World War I, the subsequent creation by the Europeans of corrupt, kleptocratic tyrannies in Saudi Arabia, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan, the endemic poverty and underdevelopment that resulted for most of the 20th century, the UN-imposed creation of Israel in 1948, and finally, in recent decades, American support for the bleak status quo. In reading recent reports from the Israeli Haaretz newspaper, one could get the impression that America's attachment to Israel may be at a crossroads. Joshua Leifer wrote in an analysis for the paper, "Standing at the podium of the United Nations General Assembly, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu looked, above all, like yesterday's man. It was not only that the props and the shtick seemed old, so did the rhetoric. The stale, neoconservative talking points about Israel as the bulwark of the West in its civilizational conflict against Islamist barbarism. The world no longer wants to listen." In large part, Netanyahu addressed the UN speech to Trump, comparing October 7th to September 11th, the Palestinian Authority to Al-Qaeda. He did the same at the White House, reprising his favorite line about Israel's defense of civilization against barbarism. Yet the irony is that this is not how the Trumpian right in the U.S. speaks. Insulated from reality by a small coterie of advisors, Netanyahu appears increasingly out of touch with the lingua franca of the contemporary right. When Netanyahu proclaims that the interests of the U.S. and Israel are identical, the likes of Tucker-Carlson hear an invitation to conspiracy, not an expression of allyship. When Netanyahu declares that Israel is fighting the West's wars for it, they see instead how the West has been destabilized by and dragged into Israel's wars. Yossi Werder says Trump's warming to Turkey and Qatar amount to a catastrophe for Israel. Trump had just signed an executive order declaring that the United States, quote, shall regard any armed attack on the territory, sovereignty, or critical infrastructure of the state of Qatar as a threat to the peace and security of the United States. Reading Trump's executive order is nothing short of jaw-dropping, Werder writes. It states that the U.S. Secretary of State, quote, shall reaffirm this assurance to the state of Qatar and coordinate with allies and partners to ensure complementary measures of support. In other words, the United States, Saudi Arabia, the other Persian Gulf states, and of course Turkey, will form a united front against any country that dares to strike anyone, however vile, on Qatari soil. And not just Qatar, Werder writes. To Washington's warm embrace of Qatar must now be added another, the one extended to Turkish President Erdogan. Among Netanyahu's blunders, the formation of the Doha-Ankara axis at such a high level of influence in the Middle East is also on his account. Would the ascent of a Doha-Ankara axis amount to a decline of Israeli influence on American foreign policy? As I hope I've shown, the neoconservative pro-Israel order has proven to be disastrous for American foreign policy and a disaster for the human race broadly. I think that Christians should hope for diplomatic pressure to swell to critical mass if they want to see their own in Palestine liberated. This would mean a single state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea with equal rights for all. Followers of Christ, a religion predicated on humanism, should want such a reality for all people in Palestine. Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching, and if you liked this video, be sure to subscribe for more content. Also, if you want to chat or talk about video ideas, become a patron to join the GDF Discord server. There's also exclusive content on my Patreon. Thanks everyone.